Hey, what's up folks? Jam Book Reviews here with another book review. Today I'll be talking about a classic piece of anti-colonial literature, The Black Jacobins by C.L.R James. Mr. James needs no introduction, but for those who don't know, he was one of the foremost Caribbean intellectuals of his time, famous for his work as a historian, his many books, and his activism. He knew and worked with many people who would go on to become world leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta. One of his students was Eric Williams, who he influenced to write the famous book Capitalism and Slavery. Williams would go on to become the first prime minister of their homeland, Trinidad and Tobago. The book, The Black Jacobins, is arguably James's most famous work, and for good reason. It documents the first successful revolution of a Caribbean nation. There were many other slave revolts in the 18th century, but this was the only one that erased the oppressive system that came before it completely, and many consider it to be the catalyst for the abolition of slavery in the Caribbean. But why is this book still so famous? It's quite dense. It was written in 1938, and many books have been written about the Haitian Revolution since then. So what's up? I believe the reason is Mr. James's strength as a writer and scholar, mixed with his passion to tell the truth about his subject. The subtitle of the book is Toussaint Louverture and the Saint-Domingue Revolution, because to tell the story of the revolution is to tell his story. He was the main character, one of the greatest generals to ever live. His forces defeated the British, Spanish, and French at the height of their power, and it's the chapters that focus on his life, his journey, from illiterate slave to revolutionary leader, where the narrative really soars like the most exciting novel. James used the truth to turn this once forgotten historical figure into a legend without embellishment or exaggeration. But don't think there is any lapse in scholarship in order to do this. This is a history book, not a fairy tale. Every significant activity before and during the revolution is meticulously documented. Mr. James spoke French, so he was able to study official historical documents like correspondence and censuses and stuff like that in Haiti and France, some of which I believe he was the first Caribbean scholar to view. And the version of the book I have has the annotations on the same page as the text, and some of them can take up like half a page easily. He's probably the only one till this day who has given so much attention to the subject. Another thing to note is the fairness with which he dealt with the different factions in the conflict. Haitian society, like most others in the Caribbean, was divided along racial lines to enforce the system of slavery. This became an issue when the revolution broke out, with different groups taking sides, betrayals, and all of that. And of course, the main enemy of the revolution was France and other colonial powers. And colonial literature would be very biased towards France because it would be expedient to do so in a world built off the profit from slave labor when a revolution of said slaves broke out. In James's time, it would have been easy for an anti-colonial historian to pay them back in kind. But James was very anti-racist. He gave a very fair and nuanced account of all the groups involved, elevating the scholarship through critique of colonial sources from the inaccurate view of it being just another race war to a legitimate revolution. If Toussaint did something politically ill-advised, or if one of Napoleon's generals did something militarily impressive, he would talk about it with the same level of reproach or praise as the case may be, regardless of which side it was. And I think this was because of James's respect for his duty as an historian to present the account as accurately as possible. Now I'll talk about some of the obstacles one may face when trying to fully understand this book, that is, its density and the possible need for some prior knowledge. As I said before, the book is chock full of information with many annotations, and it's not something to pour through, it's something to study slowly. When I first got it, I thought I would breeze through it, and it took me about 3 times as long as I had intended to spend on it. But he couldn't incorporate everything into his work. No one could. He discussed the political situation in France and the rest of the Caribbean as it relates to the Haitian Revolution. But I believe a new reader would benefit from having some prior knowledge of the French Revolution, because that and the wider Enlightenment movement is, where the ideas that guided the Haitian Revolution came from. One should also read up on Napoleonic France. That way the information you do get in the book will be fully contextualized and easier to understand. He includes a very extensive bibliography, and of course, YouTube has many videos on the subject. Oh yeah, remember the book is about the revolution itself, not the aftermath with, the different rulers and the splits and all of that. So don't expect much information on that. So my closing thoughts, I believe because of how passionately he wrote this book, that Mr. James intended for it to be both informative and transformative. He, like many of his contemporaries, didn't view history as something that is dead. It's not something that you go learn about in a classroom, then use it to study for a test, then pass, and then it's no longer relevant. History is a living thing in the sense that it becomes a part of those who understand it and learn from it. He wanted to present the most accurate depiction of one of the greatest revolutions the world had ever seen. But he also, as a Caribbean native and champion of the working class, wanted to inspire, through the portrayal of the character of Toussaint, a new generation of Caribbean people to adopt that revolutionary spirit and be agents for continuous change in a post-colonial world. This is most obvious in the closing essay titled From Toussaint Louverture to Fidel Castro, written in 1962 when his native Trinidad and Tobago gained independence. In it, he masterfully summarized the significant economic, social, and intellectual developments within and around the Caribbean since the Haitian Revolution. To close off, I will read his final paragraph. There is no space here to deal with the poet in the literary tradition, or the ballad singer, in dance, in the innovation in musical instruments, in popular ballad singing unrivaled anywhere in the world. The mass of the people are not seeking a national identity, they are expressing one. The West Indian writers have discovered the West Indies and West Indians, a people of the middle of our disturbed century, concerned with the discovery of themselves, determined to discover themselves, but without hatred or malice against the foreigner, even the bitter imperialist past. To be welcome into the comity of nations, a new nation must bring something new. Otherwise, it is a mere administrative convenience or necessity. The West Indians have brought something new. Passion, not spent, but turned inward. Toussaint tried and paid for it with his life. Torn, twisted, stretched to the limits of agony, injected with poisonous patent medicines, it lives in the state which Fidel started. It is of the West Indies West Indian. For it, Toussaint, the first and greatest of West Indians, paid with his life.